So I had this access to medical information and textbooks about sports medicine and realized like women were a special population. It was a chapter in a book. And as I'm training and looking up protocols, they're based on men. And so it was really, over 25, 30 years ago that I just saw there's this gap here. It's so strange to me. Why wouldn't there be studies in women? Why are we applying all the same things to women that have been studied in men, but we don't know more about this?
This is Early Miles, and I'm Steve Gonser. On this show, we talk to runners, coaches, clinicians, and thinkers about the moments that shaped how they train, how they think, and how they ended up where they are. Early Miles is ad-free and supported by runners who are members of the RunSmart app. RunSmart is a training platform built by physical therapists. If you have an upcoming race or are looking to train and run smart, you can download the RunSmart app from the App Store or Google Play. And now, today's episode. In her first year at medical school, Dr. Kate Ackerman opened her sports medicine textbook and noticed something really strange. Women were just a chapter, a single chapter. Every protocol she was studying and training under as a member of the US national rowing team at the time had been built on research in men. That moment shaped her entire career. Today, she's the co-founder of the WHSP Institute, head doctor for US rowing, and helped design the International Olympic Committee's clinical assessment for REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. In this conversation, we walk through what REDS actually does to the body, how it shows up across female athletes' lifespan, from adolescence through menopause, and where the real answers live in the space that's filled with Instagram experts. Here's my conversation with Dr. Ackerman. I want to start off by asking you, so when I was getting ready for the episode and I was looking, for someone to speak on this topic, I came across yours and I saw that you're a Bills fan, and I am from Buffalo, so I need to know how you became a Bills fan, and I think I need to start there.
Well, that's an easy one. Born and raised 3.5 miles from the Bills
Nice.
Stadium, Orchard Park, New York.
Oh, that's where I live.
Nice. Oh, wow. Yep, that's where I was born and raised. Orchard Park till I went off to college.
Okay,
Bills fan forever.
nice. Yeah, so are you a Sabres fan as well?
Of course. Yes. All the things.
Yeah.
I've moved around a lot after,
Yeah.
in my adult life. So I am always a Buffalo fan first. And then if things don't work out, then I pivot to whatever local city I'm in. So I've been in Boston now for 20 years. But, there were times when, I was in Baltimore for medical school. And so then I'd be a Ravens fan for a hot second if that would help. But it's always Bills first until the end, Sabres till the end. So yeah, that's pretty much how I stand on that one.
I feel like there's like a written rule though. You can't fall back on being a Patriots fan or a Bruins fan coming from Buffalo, but I don't know how you handled this past year and how that worked.
No, that was too bitter. It was too close. No, it's more like when the Bills weren't good at all, in like the mid 2000s. I'd be a Bills fan. They'd be eliminated soon after. So then I could be a Patriots fan. But no, when it's coming down to the wire and it's Bills, Patriots, I can't pivot that fast. If the Patriots beat the Bills
Yeah.
very end for AFC East stuff, then no, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah,
But I do have a
and
Boston
as it
audience.
shouldn't.
I gotta smile. I know, but I'm in Boston, so I have to. Hopefully, there aren't too many Boston listeners here. But yes, we're
Yeah,
pretty spoiled
there's
here.
some. I
We have
think they'll
so many.
forgive you. I think they, yeah. The As you've gone through, so you're doing a lot of work in women's health. I'm just curious on, I've read some background, but going from medical school to getting into things, is there that a strong athletic background that brings you forward? Like, how did you get from where you are right now, and what was that lead up like that got you so interested in women's sports and women's health and wellness, really?
So I think I've always been a bit of a feminist. It wasn't I had strong women in my life. I've men in my life too, but I had strong women in my life, and I just wasn't raised in a way to think that I was any less than by being female. And so as I went forward and got into college, I tell this story a lot where I was a musical theater person in high school. So when I got to college, I tried out for a couple a cappella groups, didn't get in. They took 2 people out of 4 both times after I got to the finals. And so I didn't make it. So I pivoted because these guys in my dorm said, "Hey, you should try out for rowing." And I said, "Why would you even think that?" And they said, "Because there's no cuts." And I'm like, sweet. So that's how I became a rower and actually got pretty good at it and ended up wanting to do more after I graduated and thought, actually, I have a chance at being on the national team if I figure this out correctly. So rowing really was the first thing that I was in a sport wise that I really, really excelled at. I was super active as a kid. I skied, I ran, I swam, but there wasn't anything that I was exceptional at sport wise. Um, so then when I discovered rowing and I really had an affinity for it and got pretty good at it, I just wanted to see where I could go with it. So fast forward, I'm on the US rowing team. I'm training at the Olympic Training Center, and I made the team after starting medical school. So I'd been training for a couple years right out of college, got into med school, and then made the US team my first year of medical school. So I had this access to medical information and textbooks about sports medicine and realized like women were a special population. It was a chapter in a book. And as I'm training and seeing, looking up protocols, they're based on men. And so it was really over 25, 30 years ago that I just saw there's this gap here. It's so strange to me. Why wouldn't there be studies in women? Why are we applying all the same things to women that have been studied in men, but we don't know more about this? So that kind of just opened a whole box of questions and just kept me learning more things, really with defining my medical pathway, wanting to do internal medicine to understand the whole body, but then also wanting to do sports med specifically and study endocrinology to kind of put it all together.
Yeah, where do you feel like we're at in the cycle of, there's nothing in textbooks, 20, 30 years ago to where we are now? Obviously, it's progressed and there's probably still more work to do. Do you feel like it's come a long way? Do you feel like it's been dragging through the mud to try to get it to here? Like, how are you viewing the process so far?
Well, it's interesting. I'd say 10 years ago, it still felt like we were kind of dragging through the mud. People were saying, why does there need to be a special focus on this? Do you really need a center for this? Don't we take care of girls and boys? Don't we take care of women and men? But then I think women's sports have really exploded. For whatever reason, all of a sudden people are paying attention. There have been women way before me, way more talented, who were talking about this. You have like the GOAT, the mother of women's sports, Billie Jean King, who did so much to pave the way, not only for tennis and for women's pay and for actually supporting other types of sports, other leagues, things like the women's professional hockey. You have these women who've been saying this stuff for a long time, but it was only more recently that people actually realized maybe it was finally the business people said, hey, there might be money here, or hey, there might be a market for this. So there's been a pivot, even in the last 5 years, where people see this as an investment opportunity. And now, in terms of research, there's a lot of people that wanna say they're in this space. There are a lot of people that are on social media who are touting themselves as experts, and there is more focus on women, but now we have to be careful that the research is being done really well, that we're not jumping just with the first company that says that they're studying something or with somebody who's still, in their undergraduate program saying that they're an expert because they have a great Instagram account. So we have to be careful that we're
Yeah.
not jumping into bed too soon with some of these things.
Yeah, do you feel like part of it too is I don't know the numbers on this, I'm sure you do, but women's involvement in youth sports and, progressing through the lifespan and being more involved in sports has played a role in that just because there's more involvement, or no, that was kind of
Absolutely.
independent of everything?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we had Title IX in 1972, and now the people that were impacted by Title IX in a really positive way are getting older, and they're not just sailing off into the sunset. They have a lot of questions. They have a certain standard of how they want to live, and they want to stay healthy and motivated, and their bodies are changing. And they're saying, well, what are the resources? What should I do now? How do I address this? So they're looking for answers, they're demanding it. And we have philanthropists who are willing to spend money on women. Some of them are women themselves who are saying, we need to study women's health. We need to study women's sports medicine, sports science. We need to push this envelope. And so you've got this combination of philanthropists and a generation of women that are demanding answers.
Yeah, from like a research side, is how is that going with I always I always think of like research studies, especially the ones like if you're getting like college age, usually the guys are signing up in my mind for that because
they're less careful. Maybe I'm just stereotyping and being gender specific here, but they're like, yeah, I'll make $20. Sign me up. I'll do these things where the women might be not involved in that side. Or do you feel like that's not at play and it's kind of equal from like a gender specific standpoint of just willingness to participate in things like this?
Some of the projects we've done have involved the athlete voice. So we've done projects with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee and asked Team USA female athletes what they cared about. And I'm the head doctor for US Rowing, and I've asked our athletes what they care about. And I think when athletes are specifically involved in the conversation and we bring them into study design, they're much more excited about doing a project. And then also advertising for us and saying, you know what, this is important. I want answers. In my clinic, I see postmenopausal women. They are probably the most enthusiastic to do research projects because they see that there's this void. They're at a stage in their life where they might have a little bit more time to come in and do different projects than somebody who's a really busy collegiate athlete or high level athlete or even high school athlete. I mean, there's a lot of demands on younger people's time. And I think postmenopausal women are realizing, okay, we have to sleep more. We have to take better care of ourselves. Hey, why don't I contribute to the research to solve this stuff too?
Yeah. Is the majority of your research, is it around um, energy deficiency in sport? Is it across a variety of topics, or do you feel like you're really tackling that big piece that kind of spans, throughout life?
So we have a lot of different projects. So at WISP, our Women's Health Sports and Performance Institute, we have kind of a diagram of how we're approaching things. So there's studies that are focused on women across the lifespan. So we can see kind of injury rates and injury prevention across the lifespan in different groups. We have certainly a lot of focus on REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, because of the work we've been doing with the International Olympic Committee and helping to design that RED screening tool, the clinical assessment tool. So a lot of my work, because of my training in metabolic bone and in eating disorders and athletes, that sort of is my sweet spot of stuff. I do a lot of what we see in our clinic. But there's so many issues that impact women that we have different collaborators and different people in our institute who are focused on different things. We have a strong focus on nutrition. We have a strong focus on we just hired a new biomechanist. We're going to be doing more in terms of biomechanics. So a lot of different things depending on who the PI is, the primary investigator or the principal investigator, and who our collaborations are with.
Yeah, I want to focus in on the red side. When did that transition, and why did that transition happen from what I understand, female athlete triad to Reds? What was the when was that transition, and what was the cause for that?
So female athlete triad, that term came in the early 1990s. It was around 1992. And then there was a paper that was written in 93 by the American College of Sports Medicine, sort of defining that combination of eating disorders and amenorrhea, no menstrual cycle, stress fracture, or low bone density. And then over time, there were more papers from the American College of Sports Medicine in 97. Fast forward all the way up to 2014 that talked about the triad as a sort of a continuum. It didn't need to be an eating disorder. It could just be not enough calories in for how much was being expended by exercise. And that was called low energy availability. Menstrual cycle could just be on a continuum. It didn't have to be no cycle at all. It could be menstrual irregularity. And then the bone health part became low bone density for age. It didn't have to be full on osteoporosis. And you could have different parts of the triad. You didn't have to have all three at once. That group, that was tied in with ACSM was updating their triad statements. The International Olympic Committee was also updating its triad statements. So by 2014, they had a new statement that said, our update actually says that there are more consequences of low energy availability than just bone and menstrual cycle, that actually there are other health consequences. So things like the GI system and having problems with constipation, the cardiovascular system where someone's really got low energy availability. They might have bradycardia. They could have abnormalities with their EKG. They could have lightheadedness. There were a lot of different systems that could be affected. And so that's sort of the body shutting down as there is low energy availability. And importantly, there are performance consequences. And so when we talk about low energy availability in that context, maybe a 15-year-old doesn't care that they might get osteoporosis someday, or they're certainly not too upset that they're missing their periods sometimes, because having your periods is annoying and it's not that fun. But if they think it's impacting their performance, which it does, that might resonate more with the athlete, with the patient. Additionally, men can suffer from low energy availability. So it was that 2014 paper with the IOC, kind of restating this concept and saying there's health and performance consequences. There are many of them, and it can happen to women and men, that really change that path. And so after that first statement came out, that's when I got involved. I was really excited to be part of that and be able to bring my endocrine lens to it and tease out more aspects to reds, and test more of these theories and test populations, see what markers we can use besides just menstrual cycle and bone health to see if someone's
Yeah.
in a state of low energy availability.
Um, I want to kind of get a clear definition for everyone who's listening. So I'm going to give you like the monkey brain definition that I have, and then you can expand upon it. But when it comes down to is basically your needs for exercise, energy available for exercise, is not met, and basically to balance the system to stay in homeostasis, your body starts pulling from other systems, either shutting them down or breaking down other areas to provide energy for that for your exercise. Is my simplest way I would put it. So you can give us a probably a better definition.
No, I think that's a good way to think about it. There's a lot of debates about how you want to define it, and there's theories in terms of evolutionary biology. But I think if you think of it kind of like, caveman. So if you are way back when and there's food famine, the body needs to restrict what it's able to do. And so one of the first systems that's going to get really impacted is the reproductive system, because the body doesn't have a lot of extra to carry on a pregnancy, for example. So that's going to be a very energy consuming task. So if somebody's running all over the place and they can't get food available to them and they have to move their legs, what's the first thing that's kind of expendable? All right, well, maybe we can change our metabolism and slow that down. Maybe we'll get rid of the reproductive system, since you don't want to be in a very energy costly state with carrying a pregnancy. The interesting thing is it's not even in a perfect order. So a lot of times that would be the perfect story if we knew for everybody, here's what goes first, here's what goes second, here's what goes third. But somebody might have changes in their thyroid function. They might have T3 suppression. They might have changes in their heart rate. They might have changes in their cognitive function. They could have changes in their recovery from exercise, or they could have changes in their menstrual cycle. So someone could have a normal cycle and still be in a state of low energy availability, and another marker might help us tease that out a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think from what I'm hearing is some of it can I feel like can be tough, from a running standpoint to say like, oh, are you tired? And when you have a full time job, you have kids, you're waking up at 5 a.m. to run before work and doing all the things. Like, of course, I'm tired. Like I'm tired all the time, and I feel like it's tough to tease out like what's subjective and what's not. And do you have a way of piecing through those at any age of an individual of like how is this leading towards maybe reds, or like how would a clinician tease that out? I'm thinking of as a physical therapist myself, and I see runners come in, and I screen for some of these things. I ask these questions, but you know teasing out fatigue, and is do you cluster things together, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a cluster. Obviously, for postmenopausal women, we can't go off the menstrual cycle. So if you're premenopausal, and you're not on the pill, seeing if your menstrual cycle is changing. So if you're feeling tired, your menstrual cycle is changing, and you're not getting as much out of your workouts, or you're not feeling as recovered, all of those things are things that you get looked at. And so part of it is just how your body is responding now as opposed to before. That can apply in postmenopausal women too. When if you're looking at heart rate, if you're looking at resting heart rate, if you're looking at your training zones, are you using some periodization to your training, and you've done the periodization, you've had this super comp week, and then you have this recovery week, but then when you go back into it, you don't feel recovered. So it's about seeing patterns and making sure that you're not missing something else. There's a lot of crossover with overtraining syndrome, especially when women get into perimenopause and they notice it's harder for them to recover and they don't sleep as well and they might be gaining weight. There's so many changes. One of the first things people do is start to eat less. Oh, maybe that'll help. Maybe I'm putting on this extra weight because I need to eat less now. And so then they might actually start depriving themselves from the nutrition that they need to perform well. So it can be this vicious cycle.
Yeah, I think, and what we'll see, all the time is just working with runners too, is like those down weeks, like, well, I'm not running as much, so I got to pull back on my nutrition because I'm not like they go to like the net sum of calories burned and calories in, and they think they need to pull back. And on those lower weeks is when you need to fill the tank, you need to, even play catch up a little bit. And the mindset, especially for like running, because for so long it's lighter is faster is better, and then you pull back on these weeks and you go from being maybe in a little bit of a deficit to just digging a hole on those recovery weeks when you're supposed to actually be recovering.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the math isn't always perfect. And so we're getting away from doing
Yeah.
energy availability calculations to really looking at these other markers because you can have different needs at different times, but it's not when you might think it. So let's say you're fighting an infection and you could barely go for a run. You need the calories to help fight off that infection. Or your metabolism can change. So you can do the number of calories in and the number of calories out from the exercise, and your heart rate monitor or whatever you're using might be able to calculate that, but it's not checking your RMR, your resting metabolic rate. So there are other things at play that make just doing straight up math about your calories not be the entire answer for you. And that's why those other markers can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting about the infection. Like your body's under stress or it needs more energy to fight off an infection or a cold or whatever. Because there's always that debate of training through a cold and what does it mean, and maybe there's some fueling to do there. But I also thinking about if we can go through the lifespan a little bit. We start early. My daughter is only 7, but as she comes through sports and things, and I'm sure there's listeners who have daughters in sports or grandkids in sports, it would make sense. And you're probably gonna be like, duh, but it would make sense like during these puberty years when you're growing a lot, like your energy demands are through the roof. And if you're then choking down and you're running cross country or you're doing any sport, you're going to quickly tap into, a deficit. Is that pretty accurate?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a really good point to emphasize. So there are greater caloric needs during adolescence and when people are going through a growth spurt. So one of the reasons we opened our WISP clinic is because we see so many of these young girls who are going through, let's say, their peak height velocity that is happening before their peak bone mineralization. So the timing of that, they're speeding up on how fast they're getting taller. Their bones aren't mineralizing at the same rate as they're getting taller because those peaks happen a little bit off from each other. So then they jump into cross country, they're training more. That's between middle school and high school. And then they get their period. Everything is getting thrown off. They might get a stress fracture because
Yeah.
they got their period, but then they gained weight and they feel like their body's changed. Their center of gravity is different. They don't like how their body's changing. They restrict more. Somebody's made a comment. A coach has told them that they need to lose a few pounds. Like there's so many things going on there. And then they get injured and then they don't want to gain weight while they're injured. So we need to be telling kids to fuel through this rough patch, no matter what. Adolescence is rough. There's going to be changes in your body, changes in your speed. You might have an injury. That's all part of being an athlete. It's all part of getting through adolescence. But we need to be giving
Yeah.
kids the tools to know how to do this better.
Have you seen anything change with just, you've been through this with pre-social media, now social media. I feel like, and just from my lens, I can see sports trending towards more of a stronger athlete mindset. There's like trends towards that, at least from what I see. But do you feel that at all, or do you feel like the scope of social media is just compounding and making this issue worse for the adolescent athlete?
I think one of the tricky parts about social media is where people are getting their information and then what your feed is telling you. So I'm sure my feed is very different than your feed. Certain things are emphasized and reinforced. So I could tell you, oh, I know all these different Instagrams, podcasts of people saying the right thing, talking about reds, talking about fueling, talking about body positivity. But that's because that's the space that I'm in. But if I were a teenage girl and looking for a certain pair of jeans, and then someone mentions thigh gap and talks about what you need to look like, that could be a totally different feed. Or our professional athletes who are so criticized, they put themselves out there and then people are commenting on what they look like and if they've gained weight and making rumors about if they're pregnant. So I think social media has sort of magnified any world that we're in, and we sort of get the feedback that we're looking for. Sometimes it can be this reinforcement that isn't always healthy. We know this. We know this in politics. People just keep getting this reinforcement of how
Yeah.
they're already seeing the world.
Yeah. When you think about the adolescent side, is there specific advice or when you're giving talks because you're leading the charge on this, like what do you tell parents who are who have young athletes coming up through whether men or women because men, the young men go through growth spurts and can have similar things like obviously you tell them the fuel and things like that, but do you ever talk about like what to look for? What are you monitoring? I'm sure like you say like are they irritable? And they're like that's a loaded question when you got a
Yeah.
13 to
Yeah.
15-year-old. But uh, what do you instruct parents at this point?
Well, I think with our clinic and others, we try to have the resources here. So, for example, sports nutrition, I think that can be good information for anybody, whether they have eating restriction or not, just that's knowledge. So, I think if you have sports dietitians available who are licensed sports dietitians and you have an athlete, it would be a good idea for your kid to meet with one just to get some better ideas, better resources, get a better concept of what they need to do to recover, recovery snacks. Kids' schedules are super busy. So, for teaching them some agency about how to think ahead, how to have this prior proper planning in terms of packing their snacks and the recovery food before they can get home again. That's a lot of it is prevention. Also, there's so much pressure right now about getting into college. The earlier like commitment from all these different sports and scouting, and the best thing I can do is try to tell people this information, understanding that I understand their pressures. So, yes, they want their kid to be good at their sport. Yes, they want them to do extra teams so that they can stand out, but giving them an idea of, okay, I hear what you're trying to get. What is your goal? You want to do well in your sport. You want to be a standout, but is your goal to stand out in ninth grade? Or is your goal to have
Yeah.
to not be injured through high school? Is your goal to get recruited in college? So I think in any of those conversations, it's more like making them understand that we hear them, we see what they're up against, we see the stresses that they have. Now we just want to inform them a little bit. And we have some information that families can find easily. Go to your pediatrician and look at the growth chart. If your kid is growing and their BMI is starting to fall off, if they're not matching their height with their weight gain, that's a warning sign. If they're getting so muscular and their menstrual irregularity is abnormal, it could be that they're all muscle and they've gained weight, but there's no fat there and you need some essential fat. So if they have a question about it, and this is where it gets tough because sometimes they'll go to a doctor or to go to some professional who's not as aware of it. I'd say if you have a kid who is falling off their growth curve or is having changes in their menstrual cycle, or with boys, it could be changes in libido. And I know parents don't want to talk to their sons about that. But if there are these changes, then they need to go to somebody who's informed enough and says, no, that's not quite normal. And if they go to a doctor and they say, oh, your kid's an athlete, don't worry about it. You got to find a new
Yeah.
resource because that's not the right answer.
Yeah. The next thing that kind of comes to mind is when I think back about patients that I treat, and one of the big ones is postpartum. And just from what you said already, which is, think about the energy demands of what your life has at that time. And then if you're exercising on top of it and how your fueling works into that, mm, feel like if you're going to have peak energy requirements, it's postpartum. And I see a lot of ladies, they're like, the mindset of I need to get my pre-baby body back. I need to get back to being fit. I don't feel like myself anymore. So they get back out and they start again. And personally I see a lot of swelling, I see a lot of joint issues. And I think it's all related partly to that. But when you think about that postpartum stage, and maybe it's a little bit later and you're in your 30s now, but I got to imagine that has a huge impact on this entire Reds conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot more work happening in that space. I think it's fantastic that women are demanding hey, we need more answers. We need to know a good return to run protocol. We need to know how we're supposed to navigate this. Pelvic PT, as you know, is talked much more openly about now, which is fantastic. The whole pelvic floor changes when you have a baby come out, whether it's a vaginal delivery or it's a C-section. Things need to strengthen up again. And people who try to run immediately will often feel like, whoa, something is not right down there. And so pelvic PT has been normalized, but we also have
Yeah.
to normalize, hey, your body's not going to be exactly the same right away. And you're taking care of a baby, you're up a lot, you're not sleeping as much. And so there's
Yes, not
energy
sleeping.
demands um, by the not sleeping. And there's also breastfeeding, and that takes up calories. And the baby's has sucked some of the bone mineralization out. The calcium has come out of the bone to help support this child that you just delivered. And as you breastfeed, some of that is still happening. So there's this like transient time when the bone density is going to be a little bit lower during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and you just have more calorie demands. So you got to be a little nice to yourself. We just need people to accept that everybody's recovery from pregnancy is different. Some people feel great. Some people's body is all stretched out. They don't quite feel well. There's a lot of hormonal changes that are going to affect mood. But people need to fuel through all of this and take the body shaming part away, because it comes back. But if there's not a race to do it, there shouldn't be a race to do it.
Yeah, I feel like the pelvic PTs part, we have internal specialists and external, and there, I don't know what you guys are seeing in your area, but the demand is through the roof with requesting and trying to find pelvic health therapists, and the supply of therapists is so low, and it's tough because, like, you gotta balance the care of the patients in front of you, and you have people who really need you, and especially from an internal standpoint, we have a few on staff, and just it's sad because the wait's so long, even
Mm.
with our practice and the surrounding people who are just, like, cash based, and it seems like that whole area still has so much room to grow, at least here in Buffalo.
Yeah, I think there's more and more of those PTs popping up in Boston. I mean, that's part of being in a bigger city, but we have other areas where we're struggling. Mental health. Through the pandemic, we had a real wait list with mental health specialists, athletes, and athlete identity, and schools shutting down. So I think these things go in waves. Now we're doing a little bit better on that front, but they go through waves. I think we'll find a new generation of people that don't think pelvic PT is taboo, and they get trained in it. And we have more specialists who are actually doing that work, because it's helpful for a lot of different reasons. I think people used to think of pelvic PT only for one or two medical issues. And now we realize, oh, the body is all connected. Maybe my hip pain is related to my pelvic floor. And so maybe I need to do PT just so I can run. And it's not because I'm pregnant. Or maybe it's because now everybody is being like referred to pelvic PT right after their baby, no matter what. So you're right. It's super duper popular. And I think people will probably just go into that profession because they see the demand.
Yeah, do you f I don't know if this is hearsay, but in Europe and things, is that part of the care cycle for women after having a child? Like, they go through a stint of pelvic floor rehabilitation, or is that something that's just been passed through?
Well, I think it depends where in Europe, but in general, there's just more acceptance of, hey, we don't expect you to have a baby and bounce back and be good to go 2 weeks later. Our maternity leaves here are really um, short, if at all. And then there's things like for professional athletes. Obviously, people like Alice and Felix have really led the charge talking about maternity leave for players. We have all sorts of famous athletes who are doing a great job speaking up and talking about what happened with their sponsorship, what happened with their companies, what should be expected, how can people keep their rank, like in tennis, how are they allowed to keep their rank as their body is coming back. I think people like Serena Williams did a great job speaking out about that. So in Europe, they just expect everything to take a little bit longer. They're more reasonable about it. They have more protections for women, and yes, they give them more resources and normalize it.
Yeah. One of the things that we're talking about, like, this kind of, used to be in the 20s. I think of my dad, he had, like, 4 kids before he was 24, and I had no idea how he did it. I have 2, but it's moved back, and I'm thinking of, women in their 30s, and really what I find with my patients when we're talking about bone health, and a lot of it from my RPT had is like you need weight bearing exercise, you need strength training. That is like once you're 30, and the sad part is you start losing bone health naturally, and while you lose it, and you can correct me wherever I need to be corrected, but as you lose it, you can only slow down how fast you lose it. So it's going to decline. You need to control that. But when you're thinking of reds and just fueling in general, um, that has to be an accelerator, right, to bone loss. It's already a normal process, a normalized process as you get older, but reds would just kinda, like, kick that into overdrive.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different hormones that affect bone. We think about estrogen as being a main one. It's a anti-resorptive, so it's keeping you from having as much bone turnover and as much bone loss. But in a perfect world, you're a really active kid and you're building up a lot of bone density during adolescence. And for women, they build 90% of their peak bone mass by the time they're 18. And then into their 20s, they basically still keep building, but it's not the same slope. And then your 30s, you kind of hold on to what you've got. You can make some adjustments if your activity level changes a lot, but mostly it's going to stay with what you've got. And then people hit menopause and there's this abrupt drop, and then it sort of slows down. So the curve, if you're healthy, stays about the same. If there's a pregnancy in there, there's a temporary dip, but you get back to where you are. So that's not like a permanent setback that recovers, but there's things people can still do. I've had patients in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s who have actually been able to improve their bone density without medications or without hormonal treatment, when they really change their lifestyle. So for runners, that's hard because they're already pretty active, but they can be doing more strength training. Their hips tend to be pretty good. Sometimes people who aren't doing a lot of upper body
Sure.
strengthening might not have as great a bone density of their spine, and you'll have more loss at the more trabecular rich bone. So the spine is more trabecular rich. Estrogen affects the trabecular bone more. But in general, that is the arc that you have. So you want to build as much as you can early on, multi-directional movement, strength training, um, hopping, like actually not just stepping up on a box, but hopping onto a box. So that kind of thing is actually still going to help build bone and maintain bone.
Yeah, when I looked at, when I go through the research, and it's been a couple of years, there was good research out there that just looked at sports in general, and, certainly it's a use it or lose it system from, like, a activity level, but the what was always surprising to me is really runners didn't have, like, there wasn't a you'd think running a lot of impact, it's gonna impact the bones are gonna respond, and they're gonna be strong, but when they looked at across the audience, like the study, that runners didn't have stronger bones than other athletes or people who didn't work out because they were just linear. They were always in one motion. They weren't cutting, they weren't rotating, and they would think like, oh, this all this impact's gonna build bone. And it brings me to like thinking about cyclists who deal, even the male cyclists deal with osteoporosis or osteoporotic bone because there's just no impact, and they have these huge, massive engines cardiovascular wise, but their frames are just frail because of the lack of change in direction type of sports, and they're consistently non-impact in one direction.
Yeah, so it's the multi-directional loading. Yeah, cyclists are not weight bearing. Swimmers are not weight bearing. Gymnasts tend to have great bone density. They're pounding in different directions on all their different joints. So there have been studies looking at these different types of sports groups, but the there still need to be more studies. There still need to be studies with bigger ends where we can control for things like calcium intake, vitamin D, other medical history, eating disorder, weight, body composition. More of that needs to get done. I think when they look at runners overall, runners tend to have a higher rate of disordered eating and REDS. So that does play
Yeah.
into it. But then when we look at really, really healthy runners and really, really healthy rowers, for example, the rowers have better spines. They're doing loading against their back in that sitting position. But the runners have better hips because they're running on those hips. But the best thing to do is multi directional and lifting weights, no matter what your sport is, doing some strength training.
Yeah. I'm just curious on, like, going back to the adolescent side, have you seen any effect, or has there been any research effect on, like, just the specialization side of those who like play soccer, which is a multi-directional sport, versus athletes who don't do that, and how it affects either bone health or just reds in general, or anything that has been, you know, maybe not fully studied or found, but that is insightful from your end?
So I worked at a children's hospital for almost 2 decades, and we definitely saw differences in the types of sports. The kids who were doing less sports specialization and really mixing it up did better. They were less likely to get injured. Um, there's this old rule that you shouldn't do more hours of exercise than your age when you're young. So if you've got a 6-year-old doing 20 hours of a sport, things like figure skating or gymnastics, they're much more likely to get injured. So you want to load the skeleton kind of slowly over time. There's and in the sports specialization, there's good research in sports specialization to demonstrate when you specialize kids too early, they're going to get more injured. It's not just the loading of the volume of what they're doing, but it's that not, um, they don't have good coordination as much. They might be just focused on one thing, like running, and they're not doing things to counteract to improve their muscle bounce, that bounce between their quads and their hamstrings and their core stability, and also just burnout. So if you got a kid who's training too much and they're doing the same sport over and over, it's going to affect their mental health. They're going to have too much focused on that athlete identity about that sport. So when something goes wrong, and it usually does, there's a setback, there's an injury, they kind of don't have something else to fall back on. So there's so many reasons we need to slow down on this specialization, for kids' mental health, their physical health, just their overall well-being and their health long term.
Yeah, I think it's funny because it's not funny, but we always, when we go to, you could tell the kids that had the growth spurt, we call them Bambis, like, out on the cross country course, because like, you can just see, like, it's like Bambi walking for the first time. They grew these long limbs. Their muscles are stretched too far because the bones grew faster than they could keep up, and they're just so uncoordinated, and you see them eventually grow into that frame. We always called them Bambis, though, and I don't think it was too derogatory for them, but
Yeah, I mean,
probably
I
just
think
not
that's
using
when
that.
parents need to pause. Parents need to pause and say, okay, we need to help our child catch up. We need to have them catch up in terms
Yeah.
of putting some muscle on. We need to improve their flexibility. We have to help them understand this new body that they're in and help with neuromuscular training and coordination. That's not a time to keep just pushing the kid full force, doing the same thing that they used to be doing.
Yeah. I like, there's 2 things I wanna cover, 'cause before we go today. One is we talked about menopause and perimenopause right at the start, but I wanna come back to that because we went through the kind of child life, and then there's like this, obviously you can have multiple kids and life changes, but jumping towards that, when you think about reds, in my line, I don't see a lot of stress fractures in this age group, but I see more, maybe I don't never see it, but, usually that's reserved in, like, the younger athlete for me, and then I just see a lot more of that general fatigue, body, like, just worried about diet, and things as they get towards this. So when you think about someone training for an athlete who is in this period of their life, what kind of things should they be looking for? What are you recommending to that athlete who is, training for a marathon and trying to struggling with this period?
So you're talking about the adult in her 30s or 40s or menopause period? Which period? Sorry, I missed it.
Menopause, yeah, training for their marathon.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things is we often filter people out. So if it's somebody that has a lot of stress fractures, and as adolescents, there is this window where they can have a stress injury, even into their 20s. They get a stress injury. We've found that the bone changes a lot. The bone microarchitecture changes when you have a stress injury. And so you're at a bone susceptibility place about 12 weeks after that injury. So we looked at this in women with tibial stress injuries. So 12 weeks out, actually the bone density has dropped a bit. Their bone microarchitecture is worse. And so takes another 12 weeks to get them back to where they started. So when people get stress injuries at that age and they keep pushing, they often will get repeat bone stress injuries. And then they might stop because they're just frustrated. They've missed a lot of seasons. They've redshirted because they didn't have a big enough window to recover. And then after a few years, if they did then get back into running, they're fine because their body had time to heal. Then they usually are pretty good. They probably addressed their biomechanics. They've looked into all these things. So if you get all the way into menopause, you've probably solved some of these things. You've already learned how to run better. If you've been a lifelong athlete and you're still running, the reason you get an injury is probably not because you have really bad biomechanics. It would have caught up with you earlier. Or if you probably don't have some of those same issues that happened as an adolescent. So now you've got somebody who's been doing pretty well. They're pretty consistent with their training. They have a good plan and a good approach to things. They're disciplined, and now things go haywire because they go through menopause. And that's just the body changing and they're not responding the same way. So, like we were saying earlier, a woman now is gaining weight in her middle. She has more fatigue after workouts. She's getting more frozen shoulder and there's more tendinopathies. Estrogen can really help with tendons and ligaments. And so now things are getting stiff and feeling weird. So everything just feels off. And they're probably not sleeping well through
Yeah.
the night because they don't have as much progesterone. So there's all these hormonal changes, and people start to feel crazy. The one part is that everybody's menopause is different. So some person might really suffer from hot flashes, somebody else doesn't. Somebody might not sleep well through the night, somebody else doesn't. Somebody might have memory loss, cognition issues, behavioral changes, mood changes, somebody else doesn't. So now they're presenting with this kind of cornucopia of symptoms, and everybody's got their different cornucopia, and they're trying to make sense of it. So they go online and they try these quick fixes, or they hear about some supplement that they should take. So I think the thing that's happening is they're getting sort of bombarded with, hey, this should work for you. Buy this, buy this supplement. Um, do some intermittent fasting, or they're hearing about fads, go on a GLP-1. And so they're thrown all this information that is not necessarily right. And I think what they really need is to understand, what are the hormonal changes that are happening? What are the options that are actually scientifically proven? Where are the data gaps where we don't know? And we are now part of this generation that's a bit of a guinea pig. And then can we do little lifestyle interventions to try to test some of these things out? And it's a slower process, but working with people that are actually certified, a certified physical therapist, a certified sports dietitian, a certified sports endocrinologist, to really get true answers rather than buying something off of a website, or just
Yeah.
jumping onto the thing that is free or is most accessible. There's so many clinics popping up online. I think it's just getting to be a kind of dangerous space because women have real questions, and what used to work for them doesn't work as well anymore.
Yeah, you mentioned GLP-1s, which, again, my monkey brain explanation is, slows digestion, reduces appetite. Seems like, uh, if you are exercising through that, do you feel like there gonna be some headwinds, like, where you're expecting, like, this could be a real problem with people who are using those and being very active, that they're gonna get in a lot of trouble with that?
Yeah, I think I don't want to throw all these things out the window completely. I think there are populations where GLP-1s can be really effective. We know they can cause people to lose weight, but they're meant initially for people with diabetes and metabolic syndrome in conjunction with strength training and good nutritional habits. They absolutely suppress appetite. There are people that want to lose 5 to 10 pounds and they're using it. And those aren't the people that these medicines are meant for. And there's so much we're still trying to learn from these meds. So we shouldn't be just throwing them at everybody. People shouldn't be able to get them so easily, because we're still learning about some of the side effects. They do have risks to them. You can lose muscle mass. You can have there's certain types of cancers that if you're at risk for those, that they can actually enhance the risk for them. So it's not a benign thing. There's side effects. Some people actually have GI distress or constipation. There can be changes in your electrolytes with exercise. So it's not a totally simple thing.
Yeah, I think you talked about weight loss and things, which is where I wanna end today, because there's like, how do you think about, like, someone who's out there, like, I wanna get in shape again, I wanna lose weight, and then, to do that, you need to be in a deficit, and, like, what's the responsible way to approach this so that obviously, everyone's different, so you can just say pass if you want, but, you're trying to lose weight, but not throw yourself into this situation where you're so underfueled that you're catabolizing muscle and having all these issues and fatigue, and you're feeling worse. Like how do you think about balancing giving your body fuel for the activity that you're doing, your lifestyle, and also losing weight?
Again, I think we want to go back to the experts. We want to go to people that can work individually with a woman and talk through her diet, see where there are things that they can maybe address and be a little bit more mindful. Um, Getting rid of some of the behaviors, coping behaviors. I think sometimes as when we're younger, we metabolism alcohol differently. And so slight changes. Oh, maybe you're going to drink a little less when you get into menopause. Sleep is really important. So if somebody is not getting enough sleep and they're constantly stressed in their work or home life, if there's ways that we can improve that part, somebody gets more sleep and their cortisol levels aren't as high, they're not going to be retaining weight quite as much. So just addressing all the things that we really have control over that are lifestyle, just moving our body more, walking more, incorporating different small changes. And then if you work with a sports dietitian and you do need to have a little bit of a calorie deficit, just going slowly, because the worst thing you can do is do it extremely and then really slow down the metabolism. Because as you then start to fuel again, your body will just hold on to it and your metabolism might never have that same kind of speed that it had before. So it needs to be done gradually, and we need to have a little bit more life acceptance. Like, I certainly don't expect to look like I did when I was 23. There are a lot of things I can do that keep myself feeling good and feeling energetic, but we need to not keep trying to compare ourselves to some younger version of ourselves. A lot of people feel great as they get older just because they're wiser and they're making better decisions. So we just need to be a little nicer to ourselves as well.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, just the understanding that if you're gonna for me, when I talk to people is if you're gonna do something, your body, whether like we talk about with compensations in therapy, like if you want to raise your arm up and you don't have strength somewhere, your body's gonna figure out a way to do it because it's what it does. And the same thing with this, if you're gonna move and exercise, your body is gonna it's gonna pull from places to get the job done. And I think if your goal is to get fit, get healthy again, and it doesn't have the fuel, well, it's gonna have to pull that fuel from somewhere. And we talked about the different places, but it can pull from the muscles. It can pull from everywhere. And your whole goal is to get fit and get healthy. Like it's you're actually doing the opposite. And I love the body that way because it really is it's just trying to stay alive as best it can at all times and get the job done. And it's just how it does it is going to be completely different. Um, One last question I kind of have for you, just to kind of wrap up, is when you think about, the entire red system and people who are out there, and human nature is they're not going to find a dietitian right away. They're going to look around, they're going to internalize and kind of check. But like, what's some things before they go to a dietitian that they maybe signal like, hey, you should go to this. Do you feel like you go right to the subjective and cluster of symptoms that they should go to determine that, or is how can they take something with this into their training for a half marathon, full marathon, and kind of self assess?
Well, I'll give a little shout out to our website. So wispinstitute.org has our academy, so education there that talks about REDS, talks about some of the screening tools. If somebody is training and they have upped the volume of training or they've noticed that something feels off. So yes, people are moody, but is their mood specifically different? Have they noticed a change in themselves? Have they noticed that they're not getting as much out of the workouts that they used to get? Are they noticing a change in any kind of things, their heart rate recovery, their cognition, their mood, their libido? These are all things that people can kind of look at and say, I just feel off. If they're feeling fatigued, that could be iron deficiency. It could be underfueling. It could be mono. It could be a lot of things. So they need to develop at least enough of a medical access that they can go see somebody and get some things checked out so they can make sure that they're not missing something else. And then I think there are different things online. There's different options of just learning how our bodies change. What are the basic kind of foods for fuel? We shouldn't be afraid of carbs. We know that carb deficiency, not just low energy availability, but carbohydrate deficiency can have independent and synergistic effects on performance. So looking at some of those more academic websites and the ones that have citations and can take you down a pathway where you say, hey, this has actually been shown in women, or this has been written by a sports dietitian. You don't necessarily have the goat of sports nutrition right at your fingertips, but there's plenty of things to read where you can get some of that information, say, okay, this has been endorsed by some really good quality organizations, or written by some of the experts around the world.
Awesome. We're going to link to that for this show and in the show notes. Dr. Kate, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're very busy. I appreciate it. And just give me one Go Bills and we can sign off.
Absolutely. Go Bills.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Early Miles. This podcast is ad-free and made possible by the runners who support the RunSmart app. RunSmart is a training platform built by physical therapists who run with an injury prevention first approach. Inside the app, you get personalized running plans, strength and mobility work designed specifically for runners, and guidance that adapts to your life, training, and body change over time. RunSmart's mission is simple: to build lifelong runners. If you're looking to train smarter and support the show, you can download the RunSmart app to get started. And a quick but important note, this podcast is for general educational and informational purposes only. Nothing discussed here should be considered medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional regarding injury, pain, or any medical condition. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on Early Miles.